Welcome to What You Didn't Hear, the podcast where we take a look back through history on specific days to find the events that were less known or didn't make the front page. I'm sure you know that in 1989 the Berlin Wall destruction began on November 9th. But did you know November 9th is also the first time the Mayflower sighted Cape Cod in 1620? Today, we will be exploring events just like those on November 19th, so sit back, relax, and learn some historical factoids.
Hey, check it out. Back it up. Yeah. Drop it down. Make it shake. Ow! History. 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 Yeah.
November 19th is the day that Abraham Lincoln delivered his famous Gettysburg Address in 1863. But now let's rewind all the way back to 461 and work forward from there. In 461, St. Hilary begins his reign as Pope. A brief century later, in 578, Kakchan Yopat becomes the 11th ruler of the Mayan city of Copan at the age of 15 and would rule for 49 years. In the middle of the Kamakura period of Japan, under Emperor Kameyama, the Mongols invade Japan under the command of Kublai Khan. After landing in Hakata Bay on November 19th in 1274, the estimated 3,000 Yuan forces stormed the beach and drove back the defending Japanese army of 6,000. A quote from Hachiman Gudokun in Science and Civilization in China, Volume 7, The Gunpowder Epic. The commanding general kept his position on high ground and directed the various detachments as need be with signals from hand drums. But whenever the Mongol soldiers took to flight, they sent iron bombshells flying against us, which made our side dizzy and confused. Our soldiers were frightened out of their wits by the thundering explosions. Their eyes were blinded, their ears deafened, so that they could hardly distinguish east from west. According to our manner of fighting, we must first call out by name someone from the enemy ranks, and then attack in single combat. But the Mongols took no notice at all of such conventions. They rushed forward all together in a mass, grappling with any individual they could catch and killing them. The invasions were one of the earliest cases of gunpowder warfare outside of China. One of the most notable technological inventions during the war was the use of explosive hand-thrown bombs. The battle lasted only a day, with the Japanese defense losing a third of its ranks in the carnage. The Japanese retreated and prepared to make a last stand at Mizuki. However, the Yuan attack never came. It was reported that the winds reversed suddenly and a typhoon ravaged the Mongol fleet. An excerpt from The History of Yuan. A great storm arose, and many warships were dashed on the rocks and destroyed. The Japanese referred to this as the kamikaze, which means divine winds. Casualty reports suggested that 200 ships were lost, and 13,500 of the 30,000 invasion force did not survive the storm. In 1493, Christopher Columbus first reaches Puerto Rico on his second voyage to the Caribbean. Ivan the Terrible's son passes away November 19th in 1581. 3 days earlier, Ivan the Terrible had attacked his son, striking him over the head. The event was the inspiration for the incredible painting Ivan the Terrible and His Son, Ivan, by Russian painter Ilya Repin. 39 years later, on the east coast of current-day United States, the Mayflower reaches Cape Cod in 1620. On November 21st, the Mayflower dropped anchor and the estimated 135 pilgrims made their way ashore to settle the colony of Plymouth. It was originally intended that their arrival would happen in early October. However, due to complications, the Mayflower was delayed. Landing so late in the season meant the settlers had no time to prepare for the coming winter. During the first winter, all but 53 pilgrims would pass away. The 53 remaining settlers' survival is credited to the Wampanoag Native American tribe, who taught them food gathering and survival skills. The following year, the 53 surviving members celebrated the colony's first fall harvest along with 90 Wampanoag tribe members. This event would be declared centuries later as the first Thanksgiving. More on this subject later this month. Prior to disembarking from the Mayflower, the settlers had signed the Mayflower Compact. The New Plymouth Agreement, or the Mayflower Compact, has become known as the foundation of liberty based on law and order, and it served as the first governing document of the Plymouth colony. Now let's stay in the United States, but skip forward a couple hundred years to 1805, when the Lewis and Clark expedition first reached the Pacific Ocean. This made them the first European Americans to cross the West, guided by their interpreter, Sacagawea. Early spring 1804, the Corps of Discovery set out from Camp Wood, Illinois, under the command of Meriwether Lewis and his second lieutenant, William Clark. Traveling north up the Missouri River, the expedition made it to North Dakota and built Fort Mandan to winter over. In early April of 1805, they continued their expedition, which is when Sacagawea joined the expedition as their guide and interpreter. By mid-November, the expedition first spotted the Pacific Ocean and reached the mouth of the Columbia River on reported November 19th. The location that they reached is today known as Cape Disappointment in Washington State. If you ever wake up and find yourself in Long Beach, Washington, or Astoria, Oregon, you should really visit the Cape Disappointment State Park, explore the lighthouses, and learn how it earned its name. Arriving in mid-November to what William Clark described as a dismal niche, the expedition moved to the south side of the Columbia River and inland a ways before constructing Fort Clatsop. The winter proved harsh. Food storage ran dangerously low as the elk had retreated higher into the mountains to avoid coastal storms, and the men were stricken with influenza. At this point in the expedition, the Corps of Discovery did not have enough currency to purchase surplus food from the Chinook tribe. That winter, Meriwether Lewis took the opportunity to catch up on his journaling and writing about his discoveries along the way to the Pacific Ocean. In late March the following year, the expedition would set out from Fort Clatsop and make their journey back, arriving in St. Louis in September of 1806. In music history, composer Franz Schubert's Symphony No. 4 premieres in Leipzig in 1849, more than 20 years after his death. Schubert added the label tragic to his symphony sometime after completing it when he was 19 years old. There's no known reason for why he labeled his fourth symphony this, but it should be noted that it is one of only two symphonies Franz Schubert wrote in a minor key, this one being written in C minor D, and the full performance taking about 30 minutes from start to finish. It is a good listen. Whenever I'm writing these episodes, I stumble across some classical music history, and I immediately turn it on to listen to it while I write. 20 years later, Hudson Bay Company signs the deed to transfer of Prince Rupert's land, 3.9 million square kilometers, to the British Crown, who then cedes it to Canada for 300,000 euros or $1.5 million. In New York City, 1873, William Magear Tweed, or Boss Tweed, was convicted of defrauding the city of $6 million and sentenced to 12 years imprisonment. At the height of his influence, Tweed was the third largest landowner in New York City, a director of the Erie Railroad, a director of the 10th National Bank, a director of the New York Printing Company, the proprietor of the Metropolitan Hotel, a significant stockholder in iron mines and gas companies, a board member in the Harlem Gas Light Company, a board member of the Third Avenue Railway Company, a board member of the Brooklyn Bridge Company, and the president of the Guardian Savings Bank. Tweed was allowed home visits during one of his imprisonments, and while on one of his home visits he fled to Spain, where he worked as a common sailor. The U.S. government discovered his whereabouts and arranged for his arrest when he reached the Spanish border. He was turned over to an American warship and delivered back to New York in 1876. In spring of 1878, while in prison, Boss Tweed would succumb to pneumonia and pass away. In sports news, in 1906, on November 19th, London is selected to host the 1908 Olympics. 10 years later, in film history, Samuel Goldfish, Edgar and Archibald Sulin establish Hollywood's Goldwyn Pictures. Goldfish later changes his name to Goldwyn. Staying on the topic of film history, in 1959, on November 19th, the first episode of Jay Ward's cartoon series Rocky and His Friends, featuring Rocket J. Squirrel and Bullwinkle J. Moose, airs on ABC. Rocky and Bullwinkle would run from 1959 to 1964, making 5 seasons and 163 episodes. Now for this next one, in 1965, what I would consider to be a historical event of great significance, Kellogg's Pop-Tarts pastries are created. Honestly, I should stop the podcast here. I can't think of another event occurring on November 19th that holds greater importance than Pop-Tarts' creation. But, with or without Pop-Tarts, history moves on. And in 1969, Apollo 12's Charles Conrad and Alan Bean become the 3rd and 4th humans to walk on the moon. Side note, Pop-Tarts would make great space food. Moving back into film history, on this day in 1975, film adaptation of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, based on stage adaptation of a novel by Ken Kesey, directed by Milos Forman, and starring Jack Nicholson and Louise Fletcher, is released. The movie would win the Academy Award's Best Picture in 1976. U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev meet for the first time on November 19, 1985, in Geneva, Switzerland. It was the first meeting between the two leaders and the first American-Soviet summit in over 6 years. The primary topics were the nuclear arms race, particularly the Strategic Defense Initiative, and the possibility of reducing nuclear weapons. The leaders established a personal rapport, which was a positive development for future talks. They agreed to accelerate negotiations on nuclear and space arms, aiming to prevent an arms race in space and terminate it on Earth. A joint statement was released expressing the satisfaction with the summit and setting the stage for future agreements. Gorbachev was invited to visit the United States the following year. And with that event, we will end this portion of today's episode of What You Didn't Hear. That way we can move on to everyone's favorite dating game show. Welcome to Blind Date Through Time, the only dating show where we travel back through history to find a timeless romance. Here is this week's mystery dating profile. Profile name, the Northern Empress. I rule hearts the way I rule empires, with vision, intellect, and just the right touch of scandal. A lover of books, art, and power plays. I'm fluent in French diplomacy, Russian politics, and the language of persuasion. They call me the Great, but I'd rather you discover why for yourself. Interested in enlightened conversation. Voltaire is a friend, not a deal-breaker. Modernizing old systems, political or personal. Midnight rides through the countryside, and turning chaos into order, one reform or rendezvous at a time. My secret? I didn't inherit my crown. I took it. Looking for someone unafraid of ambition, a partner who can match my intellect, challenge my ideals, and survive the occasional palace intrigue. Must appreciate art, loyalty, and the finer uses of power. Bonus points if you can debate Rousseau without losing your head. Do you think you know who this week's mystery dating profile belongs to? And that is all I have for you today. Thank you for listening to What You Didn't Hear on November 19th. I hope you learned something new, and now you can go impress all your friends with your lesser-known historical knowledge. Please leave a review on the podcast and share with your friends. Connect with me on social media. Links can be found in the episode description. Until next time, I'm Zane Gould, and this is What You Didn't Hear.
Check it out.